Good morning, everyone. My name is Tony Harbon. I'm one of the account directors here at Axial, and to start off with, I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to attend our webinar today. For those of you who don't know Axial, we're one of the UK's leading independent value-added resellers and integrators. We help you to meet your business challenges with a range of innovative networking security products and services. In terms of security, we provide a range of solutions that will protect your networks from external and internal attack, protect your data against authorized access, and also allow you to monitor and enforce compliance with your IT policies. Service is something that's very important to us. We maintain the highest levels of technical accreditation with our suppliers, and that way we can provide you not only the IT security products that you need, but also the technical expertise to ensure that they're properly installed and maintained over their lifetime. In today's webinar, I'm joined by Cottom from McAfee, who's going to be giving us a brief overview of McAfee's next generation firewall, followed by a demonstration. The aim of today is to show how easy the McAfee next generation firewall makes it for you to implement the highest levels of security, as well as gain visibility and control over your internet traffic. There's not a large number of us on the call today, which means we can make the session a little more interactive. So if you have any questions, you'll see a question box on the right-hand side of the screen. Please type your question into the box, and Alan will take breaks at appropriate times to answer questions that appear. On that score, I'll hand over to Alan.
Brilliant, thanks Tony. Good morning everybody. As Tony said, my name's Alan Cottom. I'm one of the network security specialists here at McAfee. And again, just like to thank you for your time for joining this webinar. As Tony said, what we're going to do is spend a couple of minutes giving you a brief overview to the McAfee next generation firewall solution. So there'll be a couple of slides, but I'm actually going to spend most of the time driving you around the GUI and showing you the functionality that the next generation firewall solution can bring. So if we take a look at how security, in particular firewalls, have evolved over the years. If we go back to more what we now class as our traditional firewalls, I think we're all probably familiar with those, and when we look at those, they focused on controlling access on a relatively basic level, so more like packet filtering type technologies, whereby they'd look to control access to our networks or out of our networks by using IP addresses or subnets, and also using port numbers to determine which applications are allowed through. So, for example, they would use port 80 to allow your web traffic through. They would use, you would enable port 21 to allow FTP, and so on. So it's more of the traditional methods there, which did a great job. It helped to block quite a large amount of unwanted access. But what it was unable to do is actually start to interrogate what was happening within the payload of a packet, and therefore it made it difficult for a traditional firewall to understand if there was anything malicious or even stop things that you didn't want to be on the network. So then if we go back to about sort of 5 or 6 years, to around about 2008, when we started to see the first next generation firewalls appear into the actual industry. And a couple of the major changes and differences that next generation firewalls brought was the ability to not only control based on IP addresses and port numbers, but actually to solve that problem of identifying or trying to identify what was in the payload in itself. So they gave us the ability to do application awareness and application control. So now when you are creating your security policies, rather than just having a rule, for example, to allow your users to go out and browse the internet, and by doing that just opening up port 80, what you're actually able to do now is be a lot more granular and start to control the types of applications that can use that port 80 communication channel. So classic examples there are be able to identify if somebody is using a messaging system, or if someone's trying to tunnel BitTorrent activity or file sharing capabilities over a port 80 session. And then you've also got the classics of where you can start to control access to common social networking sites such as Facebook and Twitter and so on. But having that application awareness didn't really make much sense if we couldn't start to tie that into who was actually making that connection. So rather than having to rely on source IP addresses or subnets of connections coming through and then trying to correlate that information back with your DHCP logs, one of the other major advances that next generation firewalls brought was the capability to add user awareness. Now, user awareness, again, ties then into not only which machine the user was sitting at, but it allowed you to create a security policy that follows that user around regardless of which machine or device they start to connect through. So it's giving us that context awareness, it's giving us that situational awareness, whereby now we can start to identify not only who is accessing the network or particular applications, but the applications that they're using as well. So from a reporting point of view, it brought major advancements. Another sort of advancement with next generation firewalls was the ability to do a level of deep inspection. Now in the early next gen firewalls, this tended to be quite limited to either particular protocols or limited to a certain number of signatures. But as we've progressed and where we see us today, and particularly around the McAfee next generation firewall, is we class it as an advanced next generation firewall. And the reason it's advanced is because it isn't just a new product or one of these first traditional or one of these first next generation firewalls that hit the market around about 6 years ago. The technology is built on a sound understanding of networking and a sound understanding of the infrastructure that these devices have to sit in. So for anybody that didn't know, the McAfee next generation firewall was actually previously a firewall that was created by Stonesoft, and McAfee acquired Stonesoft around about 12 months ago. Now that technology has been tried and tested in various environments around the world for coming up to 20 years. So it has the networking infrastructure. It has the ability to be centrally managed for large and distributed networks. But it also brings, high availability to a standard that isn't seen in pretty much any other network security solution. So by having the ability to make clusters that can contain up to 16 firewall nodes, obviously gives you the ultimate in resilience, but also it gives you the benefit of being able to add more processing resource, and also allows you to scale your cluster requirements or your firewalling capabilities as your business changes or as the threat landscape changes. One of the key things from a security point of view that the McAfee next generation firewall brought was the capability to build in advanced evasion protection. And again, this was one of the reasons that McAfee looked at Stonesoft as a technology when they made the acquisition. And it's because the pioneering research into evasion prevention that Stonesoft initiated back in around about 2007. And what this means is that any sort of advanced attack that is trying to use these advanced evasive methods to deliver highly sophisticated malware into an organization, the McAfee Next Gen Firewall is one of the only firewalls in the market that can defend against these types of attacks. And as we see this technology moving throughout and progressing, moving forwards, then what McAfee's vision for this is to bring it into the whole security connected platform. And what this means now is that we can start to bridge those gaps between network security and endpoint security, for example. So imagine a situation whereby you're running the McAfee endpoint solution, and one of those devices detects a threat. Well, that threat then can be delivered through the EPO system and generated an alert and a threat response that can be updated to the firewall. So now your endpoint security solution is actually having a positive effect on your network security solution. And that can happen vice versa. So you can take that the threat that a firewall finds, and if it's a new threat or an unknown threat, then that firewall can update your endpoints to make sure that they're aware of that threat coming in. So it's the whole security connected presence whereby we can take that real-time information from a global threat intelligence database, but also make sure that that's shared between not only the network security, but also the endpoint security. Now, if we take a look at the architecture of the next generation firewall, so as I said, there's a couple of slides on just setting the scene as to how all the various components fit together, and then I'm going to dive into a more structured demo and take you around the GUI. The way the next generation firewall is architected all stems around the security management center, or the SMC. Now, typically that comprises of two components, which you can see, the management server component and a log server component. The management server is the heart of the configuration. Everything to do from a configuration point of view with the environment is handled by the management server. So under there you can see we control and manage the next generation firewall devices. We can also monitor and take logs from third-party devices as well, so we can bring those logs and have them placed side by side with your next generation firewall security logs as well. But the third tier in that is the actual GUI client or the administrator client. And what that allows you to do is have multiple administrators defined on the system, Each of those administrators can have unique levels of access control and responsibility. And more importantly, they all can have unique credentials as well, so we can have full audit trace and find out who made changes to what and when. But what this means then is that any changes, the administrator connects via the GUI client to the management server, makes those changes offline, and then once ready, they can then commit and push those changes down to either individual next-gen firewalls or to all of the firewalls under the control of this management server. So if you need to make a change, for example, where there's a new threat, then you can make that change once and distribute that change out to every device in your organization. So you've got that fast threat mitigation capability by this centralized architecture. The other component that you can see there is the web portal server, and that isn't a standard component, it is an optional extra, but what it does give is it gives you the capability to have read-only users or read-only access into that environment. So either a customer or a help desk person can connect in using a standard web browser and have access to their own specific data, so their own unique firewall logs. They can view their policies that are applied on their firewalls, and they can also run reports to get information on either what's been happening in their environment, or start to do more statistical analysis and so on. So it's kind of an architecture that is built to be flexible and scalable, whether you're going to deploy this as an organization yourself or whether you want it to be outsourced as a managed service. When we look at the types of appliances that are available, there's a couple of key points that I like to make at this stage. I mean, obviously we have appliances that can suit and can fit to pretty much any environment or any particular requirement that your organization has. So we start off with our lower or entry-level rack-mountable devices that can operate up to about 10 gigabytes, right the way up to our 5206 chassis, which our data center class, which run up to about 120 gigabits. So we have the appliances that can sit and scale to any part of your organization. One of the underlying principles, however, of this technology is that regardless of whether you go for the entry-level device or whether you go for the high-end sort of data center chassis, the features, the functionality, the way those devices are configured, the way they're managed, the way they report is identical across the board. There's no difference in function or software. It's an identical product. The only decision that is actually required from a deployment point of view is the decision to say, okay, how fast do we need this device to run, and also how many physical network interfaces do we need. And as you can see there, these devices come with modular interface cards, so you don't have to fully populate to begin with. You can just have your basic requirements, and then again, as your business changes or as the threat landscape changes or requirements change, then you can start to add in additional modules and again add in additional devices to enhance the clusters that you may want to deploy. One of the biggest changes that we made to the technology over the last couple of years was to what we classed as unify the software core. And what this meant was that rather than having two distinct images for our firewall technology and our IPS technology, we created one security engine, which is now called the next generation firewall. And what this unified software core allows is it allows you to change the role of that device at any time during its lifetime. And you don't need to come back and relicense or change any particular part of the configuration. It's just a configuration task at your end to have that device take on a different role. So the default operational role of a next generation firewall is to operate at layer 3. Now, as a layer 3 next generation firewall, you have all of those capabilities that I talked about at the beginning. So the application awareness, the user identification, the deep inspection. But it's not just a small portion of deep inspection. This is actual full-blown IPS capabilities built in to the next generation firewall. And then there are various other features that we can add onto there, so things like bandwidth management, quality of service, antivirus. There's a lot of functionality that we can add into there as well. Now, some of the other roles that we can take is you can choose to deploy the next generation firewall as a layer 2 device. So again, in circumstances where you don't necessarily want to have too much topology changes, you can take the layer 2 next generation firewall, you can place it in your environment, and you can drop it in almost transparent mode, but still provide access control between the various segments that you need to control. And where required, you can take that device and transform or deploy it in a role that is effectively a full-blown standalone IPS solution. So when you take that next-gen firewall and choose the mode, if you have a requirement for layer 2 IPS, then you can enable that and make that device a dedicated IPS solution managed under the same security management center. So it's quite it allows for the sort of transformation. So what it allows you to do, for example, is let's say your data center or your HQ environment, you started off at the perimeter with a 3-node firewall cluster, giving you the resilience and the high availability capabilities there. Let's say you had a requirements change. A compliance standard comes in, such as PCI or something like that, that requires you to deploy IPS somewhere on the network. Well, your typical options at that point are either to purchase another device that will run and perform that IPS functionality, or what you can do because of the unified software core is that you could take one of those nodes out of your 3-node cluster, transform that node that you've taken out then from a layer 3 next generation firewall to a layer 2 IPS and deploy that device elsewhere in your network to give you that level of protection. So it's giving you that transformation, but it's also allowing you to get better return on investment from from your actual original investment that you've made. And it also gives you that adaptability, because what it means is by having that capability to transform, then you can adapt that security to however your business needs change or however the threat landscape changes. Now moving forward with the McAfee Security Connected profile, we're taking the next generation firewall and it's no longer a kind of point product that sits at your perimeter or sits within the core of your network to control access. What it's now capable of doing is interacting with much more of the McAfee security profile, or portfolio, sorry. So when we're looking at things, so for example, already we've built in the McAfee antivirus engine, so we can make sure that we can AV check files that are being downloaded via the firewall. We've also integrated with the McAfee Global Threat Intelligence Cloud, so we can now look at files, we can look at source and destinations and make decisions, or allow the firewall to make decisions based on the reputation of those devices. And again, this is constantly updated information, so we're making sure that the firewall has the most up-to-date information possible to make decisions as to whether or not it should allow or deny connections. Later on this year, the firewall will also be able to interact with the Advanced Threat Defense System, which is a solution that is taking advanced malware threats and the ability to detect zero-day and advanced malware to a whole new level. So what the firewall will be able to do is take streams of information, take files that it recognizes, and forward them to the Advanced Threat Defense System so that that device can then start to perform both dynamic and what we call static code analysis. So from a dynamic inspection point of view, we can spin up a virtual image, we can see and observe what the file does as it tries to execute. But because the attackers are getting a little bit more sophisticated, because the malware is more sophisticated, a lot of advanced malware these days can start to identify when it's actually being executed within a sandbox environment. So in that situation where it detects the sandbox and decides not to run the harmful payload, what the Advanced Threat Defense System will do is it will take it through what we call static code analysis, where it unpacks the code and takes it right back to assembly language, and then runs through that and tries to identify all of the possible calls and executions that that file could make. And again, if it detects a threat, it can automatically update the firewall and tell the firewall to block that connection, but also block all future connections where that file or that pattern is seen. So this is going to become part of that whole holistic security solution where we'll be able to share information between all the various components, and particularly where we've not seen in the past, where we're able to share that security knowledge between the endpoints and our more traditional network security environments. So at that point, I'm going to dive into the demonstration. So it's probably a good point. Are there any questions so far? Okay, so let's spin up our demonstration environment. 1 second. Okay, so hopefully we can all see this screen. So what this is, if you remember the architecture that I talked about earlier on, this is the GUI client or the administrator client that connects into the central management system. It's a Java-based piece of software, but what it allows, again, is for an administrator to log in with their own unique credentials and for them to start to control their environment. Now, this actual environment that you can see in front of you is a demonstration environment that we have, and it's available for download so that you can actually take this and install it into your own environment and have a look at what a full McAfee Next Generation Firewall production system would look like. So what we have over on the right-hand side here, where we can see all of our green bars and our yellow and our red on here, what this is a kind of a system status overview, and it will give you the ability to see what's happening in your environment in a real-time situation. So what this is telling us here is that we can see that we have 14 firewalls. Well, we actually have 15, but one of them is showing a warning, and I'll come on to that in a moment. But again, we can see how many virtual firewalls we have and so on. And these are all of the components that are being managed via this central management system. If I come over to here now, you can see again that we have a yellow shield against our firewalls, which is identifying that we have a warning down there. So I can expand this, and I can then see all of the firewalls that are in the control of this management center. So here we have a representation of a global network. As the network or firewall security administrator, I have the ability to control and manage and monitor all of the firewalls in my environment from one central location. So we can see, for example, if we take a look at this device here, Bangkok, where there's only one shield, that means that it's a single firewall. So I can come on here, I can highlight, and I can get a graphical representation or visualization of that particular environment. Now, the reason we have the green background associated with this is because the management center has a test subsystem that monitors all of the devices under its control. So what we've got here is a poll that's going that says, okay, is this firewall alive? Is it operational? And because the system's coming back green, that means we know it's operational and it's working as expected. What we can also see from here is that this firewall has good communication links back to its management and its log servers, and it's also monitoring its external interfaces, its internal interfaces, and also its two ISP links. I'll come on to this multiple links in a second. If we go down another level, then we can start to identify the ports on that device. So we can start to see the speed and the duplex settings of each port that's enabled and active on that particular device. Down at the bottom, we can start to get a bit more information. So we can start to see the versions, where it is, which policy is installed, and so on. But actually, more importantly, what we can do is start to generate some real-time statistics from here as well. So this is looking at firewall activity based on allowed traffic, drop traffic, or encrypted traffic. And as I move over the legend down here, we can start to see those lines become highlighted. And this isn't designed to give you a detailed view at this stage. What this is designed to do is give you a very fast, high-level view of the operational state of this particular environment. So, for example, if we started to see a sudden spike or increase in the amount of drop traffic, then that might indicate to us that there is something on the network that is being blocked by the firewall as it should be, but maybe there's something happening on the network that shouldn't be. So that allows us then to start that investigation process. If I bring this down and take you to another device, I'm going to take you to the London cluster that we can see here. So now, where we have two shields, that means it's operating as a cluster. Now what we have here when I render this diagram, which you see, we can, similar sort of environment, we can see the test subsystem taking place, and if I expand there, we can see that both firewalls are operational. Now this is where some of the advanced next generation features come in with the McAfee next generation firewall, and one of these is the clustering and high availability capabilities. So by default, when we operate as a cluster, then if we have two nodes in the cluster that you can see here, they're both operational on the network. So this is an active-active cluster by default. And what that means is that both nodes are operational, both nodes are connected to the network and are sharing the connections or the traffic that's going through them. And that gives us obviously benefits in terms of if we do happen to lose a node due to a failure or power outage or whatever that might be, then the other node is already operational. And because they constantly share state synchronization information, then each node is fully aware of the other node's activities. So if a node does disappear, the other one is fully capable of just seamlessly continuing the connections that have been handled previously. Now if I take us to Helsinki, what we'll see here is that we have 3 nodes in this cluster. Now again, these are active-active, so again we've got an active-active-active cluster here, and this is what that starts to set the McAfee Next Generation Firewall apart from its competitors. So we can actually go up to 16 nodes. That's 16 nodes within a logical cluster. Now that might seem a lot, but obviously what it's allowing you to do is scale up to that number. Now, admittedly, if you had 16 nodes in the cluster, you'd have one hell of a resilient solution. But think about it in another way. Let's say you start with a 2-node cluster, and in 6 months, in 12 months, whatever the time frame might be, your throughput requirements or your business requirements change. That means that your current cluster is now incapable of keeping up with the demand and the throughput. Now, typically, what would happen in that scenario is that you would be forced to perhaps maybe take out that original pair of devices and then replace them with more powerful firewalls that can actually cope with that solution. Now with a McAfee Next Generation Firewall, what you're able to do is retain those 2 original firewalls and add a 3rd or a 4th or a 5th, right the way up to 16, to enhance that cluster, to help you with the performance capabilities. And then obviously as you're adding that performance boost, you're also increasing the resilience that's there as well. Now, one of the other major benefits that this active-active clustering brings is when it comes to maintenance, and I think we're all pretty aware that one of the most arduous tasks when it comes to performing maintenance on a firewall or a perimeter security solution is the actual firmware upgrades when we need to take them to the next version. With this solution, it couldn't be more simple. What we do here is we say, okay, we have node 3. I can right-click on there, say command go offline. I can put in a reason for that, so let's just type in upgrade. There we go. And what that will do then is, you can see, is it will change the color status of that firewall. So now it's gone blue, that means it's offline. It's still contactable by the management server, but it's no longer processing any operational traffic. So all the traffic that node 3 was processing has been redistributed between node 1 and node 2. We can then simply right-click on here and say upgrade software. Now the management server will constantly poll the McAfee cloud services and automatically download the engines that are available to this firewall. So what will happen is your engine image will appear down here in the list, and you'll just choose OK to send that upgrade out to that firewall. Now the default operation there is remote upgrade, transfer, and activate the package. So what that means, if I just cancel that, is we send the upgrade out to the firewall, but we place it on an unused partition on that device. So when the file has been transferred and decompiled, that firewall will automatically reboot, and it will boot to what was the unused partition. So it's now the partition that has the latest software version on it. That firewall will come back up. Its first job will be, can I communicate with my management server? And if the answer to that is yes, then that firewall will automatically come back up online, and it will start to operate as a fully functional firewall within that cluster, even though that device now is on a different firmware version than the other 2 members of the cluster. And obviously what that then allows you to do is repeat the process. So we can take node 2, we can tell it to go offline, let's put something in there, and we can repeat that process. Now, at the point of the reboot, so after you've pushed the new upgrade package out to a particular firewall, at the point that it's now rebooting and coming up on the latest version, when it tries to communicate with the management server, if that communication fails for whatever reason, either there's a link failure or whether there's been a corruption with the upgrade has failed for any reason, then what will happen is that firewall will automatically roll itself back to the previous partition. So there's even some fault tolerance in there, particularly useful when you're doing this in a remote environment, so that the firewall will never or should never be left in a half upgraded state. So if the upgrade fails for whatever reason, the system will automatically go back to the previous partition, and then that will come back up on that previous version and still operate within the cluster, even though it's on a different version than the other members in there. So as you can see, what that actually brings you is the ability to do upgrades of your security solution during operational hours without any sort of downtime to the network environment. Do we have any questions on clustering, Tony, at the moment?
Not at the moment, no, you're fine. Okay,
thanks. So what I'll just talk about for a second now is you've probably seen within these clusters and the firewalls I've been looking at there, is that we have a number of ISP links. There is a built-in function with the McAfee Next Generation Firewall that enables us to have any number of ISP links or WAN or Internet links terminating on the firewall, and those links, more importantly, can come from any number of different service providers. So what it allows us to do is take those links from multiple service providers. Those links can also be of different sort of media or form factors, so we can have mixtures of leased line, Wi-Fi, ADSL, SDSL, 3G, 4G even, whatever type of connection you want, we can bring those in, and we can allow the firewall then to use them in a load sharing or a resilient way. So we can either use all of the links available to distribute traffic across all of them, or we can start to allocate certain links for particular services. So, for example, if we have a mission-critical application, or let's say an application that's sensitive to low latency, then or to high latency, sorry. So what we can do then is we can say, okay, let's, for example, say we have our video streaming or our voice conferencing software. Then we can make it so that that application goes over the link that has the better SLAs associated with it. And then the links that have less associated or less guaranteed SLAs or less capabilities, what we can do then is we can make sure that, for example, our email traffic or our web browsing might go over the SDSL or the ADSL circuits. And this is a fully automated process, so that if we lose an ISP connection, because the firewall is constantly monitoring that capability or that connection and link, if we lose one of those links, the firewall will automatically notice that, and it will automatically divert any connections that were using that link to one of the other remaining working links. And the same happens in return. So as soon as that link is noticed to be back up again, then the firewall will automatically bring that link back into its pool and start to distribute traffic over there. Now, obviously, from a user perspective, the users won't see any change in service. From an administrator point of view, again, the administrator hasn't had to do anything, but the administrator would be notified via the various alerts and so on. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you into the logging capabilities. So let's click over to our log tab. And this is probably one of the most powerful parts of the system, because as we're aware, once we've created the security policies, and I'll show you the security policies in a little while, but once we've created that and we have the firewalls out in commission and they're doing their jobs, then the most important part, arguably, is the information that's generated or captured from that device. So what this is the log browser. By default, it will look at the logs from every single device under the control of the management center, regardless of whether you have one log server or 50 log servers. It will look at the logs for everything that's being generated. What you're then able to do is go through and to start to filter out the information or zero in on the information or the files or the log data that you want to look at. So this main view that you can see here, this is when it's paused like it is here, when it's static, that means we're looking at historical log data. So I can either sort of start to scroll up through this or start to scroll down to look at historical log data. I can create custom time entries if I want to see the last 15 minutes, hours, 12 hours a day, 7 days, or custom time period. But actually, as you see, when I start to click on these, or let me show you the amount of information. So I don't expect you to read all of the columns here, but just to give you an idea, as I start to scroll to the right, you'll start to see the amount or potential amount of data that we can capture on a per log entry basis. So in terms of getting information out of this, there's a lot of information we can start to capture. Now, obviously that's difficult to read in a live environment. So what you want to do is be able to zero in on the information. There's a couple of ways that we can actually help you achieve this. So down here in the bottom right-hand side, we have the watch list. The watch list picks out the common and more critical fields from each log entry. So as you'll see, as I start to click on these, you'll see that the watch list values change, so we can get a rough idea of what's going on. If, for example, I want to see this log record in a little bit more detail, I can either choose to double-click on there and say, don't show me the watch list, show me all of that log entry. So I've just taken that one individual log entry, and now I can start to view it in that way. Or if I bring it back, I might want to see this in a different way. So if I go to details now, this will generate a page dedicated to that one log entry. And as you'll see, we can get more information. So for example, if I maximize this here, we can see that because this is an orange background, it means it was terminated by the deep inspection policy. And actually it was terminated because of our URL filtering capabilities. So this user was identified as trying to go to a gambling site. It's picked out the URL that they've tried to get to. It's even given us an event visualization, so we can see where the source address machine was. So this is based on a more traditional rule. We can see its geolocation, so it's come from our France office. It's tried to get through this firewall using HTTP, and it's been trying to get to this particular destination. So, and again, rather than just giving you raw log information, the event visualizations can really help your, the help desk and the support staff to try and visualize what's actually happening without having to understand all of the various network subnets and raw log data. And then further down here, we can actually see the packet, some of the packet content. So dependent on the level of recording you have, we can start to see what's going on down there and identify what's within the session. We go back here, and let's say I now hit play. What this is showing me now is logs arriving in real time. So this is bringing in log data from all of the firewalls under the control of the management center, and it's starting to show me this in a real-time environment. And again, this can start to look difficult to view. So what we can do is if we click anywhere on there, then we can pause that view. Now we can see here in the action column, we've got some terminate actions. So what I might do here is say, well, show me all of the traffic that has been terminated. And then that will filter that out just to that terminated traffic. I then might want to say, well, show me all of the traffic that's being terminated to this particular source address. So I can take that destination address there, and hit apply. And then it will start to filter that, so where the action is terminate and the destination address is this. And then we might go a little bit further and say, well, show me where this source address was also involved. And again, this is just adding to the filter. So each time we do that, we're zeroing in on the information we want, and then we can even maybe start to look at the situation that's been identified. So we can see some buffer overflows. So we might want to start to track on those type of activities. So let's take that situation, and we'll add that in there. And then that's going to really start to filter in and identify. So we can see now, when I click on one of these events, I can go to details, and it's starting to show me again. We can see that it was a terminated session. We can see the players involved, the attack host, the target host, and so on. We can also see the associated CVE references, so we can go and look at that for additional information. And again, we can start to see who, where, what, and which protocols and so on was used from a visual point of view. So it's just a very quick way of being able to zoom in and focus and control, exactly what's happening, or view exactly what's happening in your environment. So let's just clear that. And just as another example, if we wanted to look at, filter out and look at real-time information, if I use the terminate again and hit apply, now if I hit play, that's only going to show me the records that have been identified as terminated traffic. So I can start to see potentially where the problems are on my network in a real-time environment. And over here you can see the applications and potentially the users where we've got the user interaction as well. Let me just clear that there. Some of the other things we can do from this view is to start to give you some more analysis type of information. So we can start to show you the types of reports that could be generated. So for example, if I show you or try to run a report that shows me the top applications that have been seen on the network. So this will produce a graph based on the last 15 minutes of all of the applications that have been seen on this network. So for example, then if I want to say, okay, well, who's been using BitTorrent? Then I can right-click on that section there and say Show Records. which automatically creates the filter based on the application BitTorrent. And here we can see then the application and the user. We can see it's only one particular user, but we can see some critical events here. So we might want to add that to the filter and start to identify then what's been going on. And here we can see a code red worm attack within that particular connection. And again, we can go into the details. Now this time, because we've used some of the next-gen features and we're able to see, hook in the Active Directory information, we're now also seeing which user has been involved in that connection as well. So let's go back to the records and clear this. So that's based on generating statistics out of stored log data. But what we can also do is view that log information. So for example, if I go to live log records, I then go into Analyze Live. What I can then do is run that same top applications view. And this is going to generate a real-time view of the applications that are being seen on my network at this point in time. So classic example is, people start to call up saying, well, I can't get access to our CRM system, or I can't get access to one of our mission-critical platforms, or the connection has gone really slow. Then you can come on here, you can start to see what's actually happening from an application point of view. So, you might then start to see, well, such a body's doing Dropbox or BitTorrent downloads, and here we can see someone playing World of Warcraft. So it's giving you that information, but in a much more user-friendly format. Pause that. Let's go back. So just to finish off with part of the demonstration, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move over to the policy type of the policy side of things. Now, when we want to modify our security policies, we do it in such a way that we have this what we class as our hierarchical policy template. So the firewall template here, if I edit that, by default contains all of the rules that the management server needs to control and manage the firewalls that are under its control. Down here at rule, you can see between 14 and 16, we have this insert point. And what that means is, if I just go back, if I open up my HQ policy now, because the HQ policy is nested underneath the firewall template, when I edit this, you'll notice that the rule ID starts at 15.2. It's actually 15.1, which is this comment line, but we don't number the comment lines. So if I look at our inherited rules, you'll see that all of the rules in gray are the rules from the template policy. So these are all hard-coded in, and then where that insert point was between 14 and 16 are actually where our actual security policy rules exist. And then right the way down at the bottom, we can see our default discard rules. So this gives us the ability to add flexibility and control. So if you imagine, if you wanted to define a policy here that says no matter where within our organization we want to deploy a McAfee next generation firewall, but we always want it to have a common set of rules, then those rules could be placed at the template level. Your site or location specific policies then can be contained below there, because they will automatically inherit any of those default rules that you apply. And that leads back to that that fast threat mitigation thing. So if there is a new threat, we can make a change at the template level and then immediately just refresh the policies on all of our firewalls, and every single firewall is updated because of that inheritance policy. When it comes to editing the policies, it's pretty standard in terms of firewall rule bases. We have source, destinations, services, actions, and so on. But a couple of things that we do differently, and if I just collapse some of these so we can get a better view on things. These are just guidelines. You don't have to structure the policy this way. It's just the way that it's being done here. We have a mix of both traditional and next generation rule, security rules within our policies. So for example, here we can see Helsinki internal network. And when we look at the properties of that, then we can see that that's actually based on an IP subnet. We can also see that we can interact with DNS names. So we can allow access to particular DNS names. And here we can see that these are traditional port-based rules. So protocol TCP, destination port 80 to allow web browsing. If I wanted to change this, or if I wanted to now introduce more next generation type rules, then for example what I can do, if I just add a rule above there, I can say, well, I might want to link in rules from my user account. So let's look at our domain, and we've got a demonstration domain here, which hooks into my Active Directory. So I can look at various sites within my Active Directory. I can bring out groups and users. So I might want to bring the sales team out and add those in there. Or I might want to bring out individual users from Active Directory. So I might want to take George and let's take Jill, for example. So now, regardless of which machine that these people log in from, as long as they log in using their Active Directory credentials, then they're being controlled using this rule within the policy. Now, what I could do here is I might be a little bit lazy and say, rather than giving them a specific destination, I'll allow them to go anywhere outside. But what I am going to do is lock them down based on the type of application that they can use. So a couple of things we can do here. If I just wanted them to do HTTP access, then again, I could either use the port 80, or what I could actually do is bring in the HTTP application. So the 3 squares that you can see here, the building blocks, that denotes an application. So rather than just saying port 80, this is actually looking into the payload of their packets now and identifying that that communication, that data, is actually HTTP traffic. So they could actually send a web request out on any port number using that rule. But what I might want to do is lock it down even further and force them so that only the HTTP application is allowed over port 80. So to do that, we can edit this service and we can combine the application with a service port. So if I do HTTP again, remember this icon denotes the actual traditional ports and this icon denotes the applications. So now what I've done is I've created a rule that allows us to control or make sure that it's HTTP, the application, and it's using port 80. And if we design our policy correctly, then that means no other HTTP or port 80 communication can take place or without going over port 80 and using that rule. So it's a way of actually doing not only application awareness, but also doing policy enforcement as well. Another example of this might be, let's look at this and edit. So we might actually add a row there, and we might also want to do it using DNS. DNS is one of the more common routes that an attacker will take in order to get botnets or command and control software going, because most organizations' firewalls will allow port 53 out of their organization. So what I can do here is a similar thing. I can build a rule that says only allow DNS over port 53 as providing it is actual DNS application and we're not trying to tunnel something else over it. So it's a way of giving you that control and adding that next generation functionality into your, or side by side with your more traditional based firewall rules as well. Just before I finish off on here, just one more thing I want to point out is that within the action cells, we do have the common things that you'd expect to see, so like the allows, the continues, and the discards, but we also have a jump rule. Now what that jump rule does is it allows us to direct traffic out of the main security policy and call in specific sub-policies. If I show you that from the tree view that I had before, you'll see here are our main policies, and down here at the bottom we have our sub-policies. So I can create sub-policies specific to web services or to mail services or to departmental usage, for example, and I can have those matching in the main policy. So if I wanted to create a rule based on SMTP, I could create a rule quite high up in the policy, let's say, that says, if I add a rule after there, any source to any destination, but if the packet is SMTP, then don't permit or deny that packet. I want you to jump to a new sub-policy specifically designed to contain the rules associated with email. So I can create that sub-policy, and then I can put in my SMTP specific rules in there. And what we've just done with that is we've said, as the packets hit the firewall, they go through the template rules, they go through the main policy rules, it hits the rule in the policy that says jump to the sub-policy, and then that packet is taken directly to the sub-policy in order to be processed by the rules that actually mean something to it. If there's no match in there, the default option is to return back to the main policy where it can be further processed, or you can kill it there and then by putting a deny rule within that sub-policy as well. So these are all just ways to help you design and structure the policy in such a way that it makes it not only easier to manage, but also it also allows the firewall to make better use of its resources by only processing packets against rules that actually mean something to it. So I think in terms of time and obviously from what we've seen so far, I think that's pretty much all I was going to show. Just to finish off, we do have the ability to have real-time dashboards on here as well, so we can start to get that real-time situational information and context. But I think from my point of view, Tony, that's kind of all I wanted to show today. Have there been any questions?
Yeah, thanks, Alan. There's a few questions we do have, of phrasing really. The first is with respect to web connections, and I guess it boils down to in real life, how do people use the firewall to manage web and social media connections? I guess you were saying the firewall allows you much better control than just blunt allow or deny or apply a filter. Can you add any clarity on that area?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a number of things you can do there. So obviously, some of the next generation features actually allow you to control access to types of websites. So if you wanted to control access to Facebook or to Twitter or any of the popular social media sites, then you can create actual access rules that will look at the traffic and try and identify those applications. The other way that you can do that is by using the URL filtering capabilities as well. So it isn't a standard feature, that's an optional license, but using URL capabilities, you're then able to start to control not only based on the application, but the types of categories of sites that those users might want to get to. And particularly when you combine that with the Active Directory integration, then you're able to link in your users and groups and then control the types of sites or the categories of sites that they're able to get to.
Okay. Another question is really tied into the IPS capabilities. You mentioned that there are a full IPS capability within the firewall. Is the McAfee IPS in any way superior to those on other people's firewalls?
Good question. I mean, obviously, being completely biased, I'd say yes, but no, it's a valid point actually, because a lot of the time when you look at technologies that have functionality built in, it does tend to be a tick box feature. So we're going to give you firewall capabilities, but we're also going to give you an element of IPS. Now, what I would say here is that going back to that unified software core, it's essentially two products that have been molded into one. So yes, there is the firewall capability, but there is also a dedicated, almost point solution-based IPS functionality in there as well. Now, when you're running as a next-generation firewall, you get the next-generation firewall capabilities, and you get full IPS capabilities in the same policy or in the same engine. And what that allows you then to do as the user is to say, okay, we can define a policy that will allow your typical firewall access rules, but for where we have access to maybe mission-critical or sensitive data, we can then enable IPS on those specific rules. So it's not a tick box that says IPS is enabled and you don't know what's happening in the background. It's a tick box that it's a selection that allows you to say, I want to enable IPS on this particular traffic, and then it gives you the full IPS capability to inspect the traffic that's using that rule. So it's not just a tick box solution that says, yes, we have IPS and here's our top 50 signatures or just a handful of protocols. It is a dedicated, what was classed in the Gartner Magic Quadrant 12 months ago as a visionary IPS solution.
Okay. There's also a question with reference to reporting, which is what reporting facilities are available to make managing security easier?
Okay, so I mean, well, as you've kind of seen here, what I've been doing is actually just throwing up a few dashboards. So this is our inspection dashboard. We can start to see some of the attacks and things that have been going on. Previous one was our application, and without having data in here to run reports, this gives you an idea of the types of reports that can be run. So there is a full reporting solution built into the management center, which allows you to either use some of the predefined reports, or you can create completely customized reports based on your environment and your requirements. And then those reports can be automated. They can be scheduled to run at whatever period or time that you want. And more importantly, they can either be left on the system so that you can view them through this interface, or you can have those reports automatically distributed out to particular individuals. So we can take those reports, we can convert them to PDF documents, for example, we can convert them to XML or HTML documents, and we can have those reports then automatically distributed out once they've been generated and run within the system.
Okay, I guess the other point worth making there is obviously you can also export any information out to a CM product such as the McAfee Enterprise Manager for event management and being able to manage security on an enterprise scale.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, sorry, Tony, go on.
No, it's okay.
No, what I was going to say was, yeah, that's absolutely right. So as well as collecting all of the log data here in our centralized log server, we can also make sure that any log data, and we don't just send, it isn't just a case of send log data to a third party. You can also pre-filter that, so you can just send the information you want to send out. So yeah, full third-party support with native links into the McAfee DSM solution, for example, is also there.
Okay, very good point here. Given the extra security that's being provided, is there a hit on performance on the firewall?
The short answer to that is no, and the reason is because the way we've architected both the device from a hardware and software point of view, and also from the inspection engine. So we try to maintain as minimal latency as possible. And I'm not going to say that there's no latency whatsoever, because obviously whenever you turn on anything that adds any little bit of extra inspection, then you're obviously going to introduce some sort of delay. Now, what I will say is that because our solutions use 64-bit hardware with 64-bit software, that means the performance level of these devices is able to go effectively through the roof. And the way we use our inspection engine, it basically it means, without going into too much detail now, but what it means is that rather than trying to inspect data sequentially as it's going through, we can almost inspect it in a parallel form, so that everything is inspected at the same time against every possible element or situation that we want to check for. So all I'll say is that the figures that we do quote on the website and the data sheets are genuine figures. They're not they haven't been enhanced or fluffed up in any way.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That brings us around to the hour in terms of the webinar. So thank you very much for the presentation this morning. Thank you to everyone for attending. Just to let you know that there will be an on-demand version of the webinar that will be available within about 48 hours. We'll be sending out emails to people who have attended. Again, thank you once again. My name is Tony Harbon. If you want to contact me, my email address is pr@axial.co.uk. If you have any questions, we will be sending out some additional materials to the people who have attended today. In the meantime, thank you very much. I look forward to speaking to you again.